Bryn's birth was fantastic and it was great, but it was very, very long. It was 56 hours of labor for Emily.
Bryn's delivery, she was sunny side up, so she came out, not the regular head down, face down. She had meconium, so we had to have the NICU team come in and clear out all her, her throat and her chest. So her birth entry was long, and after she was born, I was exhausted.
The nurse came in and scared us with Bryn and said, there's some things I'd like to talk to you about with Bryn. And we're like, oh my God, yes, what? She goes, well, she has one simian crease, not two in her hand. And she said,
so she doesn't have a life and a laugh line, or how there's the two lines. She has one that's straight across.
And she has almond eyes. And that's what she said. Oh, and she has a very small torso. And we're like, oh my God, what are you trying to tell us? What is it that and very short limbs.
Yeah, short limbs.
Right?
Yeah.
So she was alluding to potentially that Bryn had Down syndrome. So that was our first, crazy thoughts of our life changing right there. And then the doctor came in and said, oh, I've heard you've been given a bit of a scare. She goes, there's nothing wrong with this child. Absolutely, typically normal, whatever that means, right? So our first ever, thought of something changing our lives completely wasn't there. The irony is that it came a little later on with Piper.
I think we always knew that we wanted to have kids. And then when we moved to Halifax, Kelly had just started her career, but she had said that she wanted to start a family before she was 40. And so that was really important to her, but she didn't want to set back her career by having kids. So I said that I would have kids. She, we think, has asthma.
Most kids with cerebral palsy develop it in utero, at birth, shortly after. They've been one of multiples.
So she has a hard time when she does get a cold or a cough. She has a hard time just breathing in general, but then she has a hard time getting up the mucus. She can't make herself cough.
Cerebral palsy is a term that we use in medicine, and it's usually to describe a group of symptoms. Cerebral meaning brain, palsy usually relates to motor movement.
Well, I think right from the beginning it was a typical birth. There was no emergencies, there were no red flags, everything was smooth. So if you were to say and look back and say, oh, that went wrong or this went wrong, or we knew right from the beginning, we did not know. We did not know that anything was going to be different, in regards to Piper's life, because the birth and your pregnancy were pretty smooth.
Yeah.
Well, cerebral palsy is a global term that's often associated with injuries that happen either prior to birth or around birth, and they result in children having difficulties with motor movement. That can be moving your arms, your legs, but it can also be related to speech and swallowing. So, and it's quite different, the presentations, and because of that, the treatment is different.
Cerebral palsy can affect our kids in many different ways by limiting their speech, vision, cognitive function, and mobility. We've had kids within our agency that have been involved, say, in a car accident or a near drowning before the age of 3, and they will get the diagnosis of cerebral palsy. It can be as mild as where somebody can just have a slight malformation of their hand, walk with a slight limp, to somebody that is totally incapacitated, that relies on machines for their daily functions, oxygen, and tubes for feeding. So there's such a range, and every child appears to be different.
Bryn's birth was just so exhausting. I was just afraid of that exhaustion again. She was easy. I mean, it was, 10 minutes maybe of pushing and she was out. She was, she was really happy. Everything was typical. I mean, she was a beautiful baby and there was nothing out of the ordinary.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't even know initially, and it can present later on in life. Some children and babies, we know early that this is a likely possibility because we often see them at the time around birth because there are events that are highly suggestive that this is going to be an outcome. In other children, there may not be anything. It's just over time, and as your gross motor development becomes more complicated, then things start to show up, and then maybe they're not following developmental pathways that you'd expect for children of that age.
It wasn't until probably about 3 months that we kind of, were questioning some of her, her milestones.
Behaviors.
Yeah, she wasn't reaching her milestones. She was still, very infant-like. Her neck wasn't very strong. She had a thing called torticollis, where her neck is really tight in one area and really weak in the other area, and she constantly would pull her head to the left. And we got through that, and we thought that that was kind of it.
There's certain tests that are pretty standard. So whenever we see a child that comes in and is not meeting developmental milestones as expected, first thing we do is we tend to take quite a long time with the history, because most of the time the details of what we should be looking for are within the history. There are lots and lots of tests that you can do, but for the most part you can eliminate a lot of them if you do an accurate history and you spend time with the family trying to sort it out and get the details from the parents of what the biggest problems are. Once we have a better sense of that, the typical things we would order is an MRI, because an MRI allows us then to see the structure of the brain.
The first little bit was normal. Everything, she was a great nurser, so she breastfed well. There was no problems with those struggles at the beginning. We started to see kind of odd characteristics. So she was doing some really weird behaviors. Her
Unique behaviors.
yeah, like she would stare at her hand,
And which is very typical at first, right? For
when they
kids
find their hands.
They find their hands, but that didn't stop. It just continued. And then she thought it was funny. So she'd giggle. She'd look at it and then she'd look at it and she'd giggle at her hand. And it was really funny at first because we thought that was really cute.
Motor movement becomes much more obvious once you're past 3 months and you're getting into rolling over, crawling, sitting up. 6 months you're sitting up and you're starting to do more crawling and those types of things. And then when you get around a year, you should be looking for pulling to stand and walking, and then further progression that way.
Mommy wants to try to get a job.
Yeah. Eventually, Brin, first I have to finish school. Brin told us the other day that she didn't want to go to school anymore because she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom.
Oh.
Cup holder. Just drop it. Go, go, go. Make it in with these kids, kiddo. At her 6-month well-being baby check, I mentioned my concerns to our family doctor, and I mentioned how we were trying to feed her solids, and she wouldn't take a solid. Every time a fork or a spoon went near her mouth, she would just push it out with her tongue.
I've had the pleasure of knowing, 200 or 300 families here within the city of Calgary who have kids with CP, and I believe that they're just trapped, like they get trapped within that body. And I know for my own son, there's so much that goes on. He just has such a tough time expressing it.
She did her exam on Piper, and then she asked me to wait in the waiting room. She called the neurologist and called me back into the examining room and said, something's really wrong with your baby. So she gave me a list kind of like off the top of her head of things that could be going on with Piper. One was seizures, which she was hoping that that's what it was, and that it would be easily treatable. One was that there was a lesion on her brain. One was that she had a metabolic disorder, and the other one was that she had lack of oxygen during birth.
The history was provided that we may be worried Piper was having seizures. They can happen in children that have cerebral palsy and are more common in children that would have polymicrogyria. So polymicrogyria is a term that describes the way the brain develops. If we dissect the term again, poly means many, micro means small, and gyria means gyrus. So in terms of the gyrus and the valley sulci, it means they have lots of small gyri, and the sulci are not as deep.
You know, when we first found out that something was wrong, I think they were dark days. But I think Kelly's a planner. And I think we just had to keep going.
So then what we order is something called an electroencephalogram, or an EEG. That involves putting leads on your head that record brain activity. And then over time, what they're looking for is whether or not the child would have seizures. We do prolonged recording if we want to see it over a longer period of time than the typical 1 to 2 hour recording. And often that's done when we really want to see what happens during sleep. Because a lot of seizures happen during sleep, and unless you catch them, you're never quite sure if they're happening.
Yeah, it was a huge shock to our system to think that something was wrong with our child.
Piper, do you want some music? Piper's music time.
We love Renfrew.
Yeah. We moved back to Calgary and had Renfrew hooked up before we even got here. So we knew we wanted to be at Renfrew. And I mean, everything luckily worked out and we got in, and
they're passionate about Piper, they're passionate about their kids. It's a fun-loving spot, it's clean, it's safe, and it's really, really great. It's an amazing spot for her. They don't have that, they didn't have that in Halifax. And that's another reason why we had to move. We needed Piper to have a school where she could be with her peers and she could be in a safe environment and learn. She gets OT, PT, she gets everything, her cognitive development, she gets everything all wrapped up in one day. Speech, yeah.
Greta. Piper. Piper.
You know Puppy's hair in your hand.
Greta.
Are you just going to keep Warren in the Riften for a circle?
I know.
There's different forms of treatment that have evolved. For a large part, what is most beneficial for families is occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech-language pathology. How do you maximize a child's potential and help them to integrate as much as possible?
bringing her here is so important because she loves the social interaction with her peers. So that's why this place is perfect for us.
Okay. Stand up, stand up, stand up. Push. There.
I was desperate to have an answer because I carried her. I wanted to know what happened, like did something happen? Of course I have my own guilt. Like, did I do something wrong while I was pregnant or anything?
I became involved with the organization first on the board of directors because I had a son who was diagnosed with cerebral palsy. I wanted to just make a difference in his life and in the life of the community, and got involved with the agency.
We spent hours on the internet, Googling stuff all the time. And did it make me feel any better? Probably a little bit, because I could educate myself and know what to ask the doctors and prepare myself for that. And it could become an obsession. And I mean, I spend nights on Dalhousie's library site looking up research papers and reading research papers that have to do with Piper instead of my own schoolwork.
My favorite thing to do, running, biking, and playing with my sister.
She's an amazing big sister, and she watches us and she knows like how much Piper needs.
We always said that she was Piper's voice, and she is Piper's voice.
Good job. Well done. Yep, looking good. Looking good. Where do you get those moves from?
We always say that we feed Piper little bird pieces, like she's our little bird, and Bryn knows if she's sharing something, she always gives her a little bird size piece. And yeah, she's very compassionate. She's always wanting to help, and we don't even have to ask her.
Piper! Where's the Piper?
She speaks up, and she's not afraid to speak up when somebody's doing something out of the ordinary or out of Piper's routine.
And does she like pink? Oh, yeah.
Green.
Oh,
Is green your favorite color?
I think Bryn thinks green is her favorite color. Don't you think?
I know.
You know.
Oh, yeah. Or if we go to the grocery store and the lady says, "Oh, hi, Piper," or "Hi, little girl," and Bryn will always say, "Oh, this is Piper. She can't speak, and she has cerebral palsy." And that's when she'll say, "And I have 2 moms." Usually she'll add that in there too. I'm like, "Oh, okay, Bryn, that's good."
I ran into one of my old bosses, and she knew that we had a son who had special needs, and we were just talking about how our life was, that kind of thing. And she said to me, she goes, "You don't have a bad life. It sounds like you have a really great life." I said, "You know what, we do. We have an absolutely fabulous life. It's just different. It's just different. And I can't imagine my life any other way without Taylor in it."
We call this Piper time. Everything that she progresses and how she progresses, we call it Piper time. And even the doctor is now starting to say Piper time. So everybody knows when we say Piper time, it's Piper's time. It's how she progresses, and it's on her own time when she's ready to do something.
And the public can have a misperception of a person's cognitive ability based on the fact that they're in a wheelchair or they have trouble speaking. It's not actually reflective of what they can actually do.
Hey, it's a microphone.
I am her. You are my mama, I am your baby.
We want to empower families. We want to give them the tools so that they can make their child's life and their life as great as it possibly can be. It's a different journey. It's not a bad journey. It's just a different journey. And we want to give them all the help that we can to support them along that way.
We have a company that follows us, Ryan Murphy Construction, who have helped us rebuild our home to make it accessible for our daughter, make it accessible for us as a family, and we have great family that's here in Calgary, and we have great friends, and our friends are, there's a lot of friends that help us out a lot of the time, and that is key. We have the race that we do for Piper that's raising money for cerebral palsy, so it's called the
Scotiabank Marathon.
Last year we had about 20 or so people, and this year we have an amazing amount of people. We have Team Piper shirts, and they say we're on Piper time on the back, and it's right. Yeah. And we raise money for cerebral palsy. Not something we ever thought we'd be doing in our life, but we are.
Again we will fly, soon we will sing, and on that day I tell you everything. My heart wrote it down, I know every word. You are my mama, I am your baby bird.
And then, funny story, Dan,
Yeah.
after,
Well, I want to hear the funny stories.
just after I had given birth to Kelly,
Oh.
or to Bryn.
Whoa! That